Hello, and welcome to one of IGC's first remote interviews for Africa Industrialization Week. Africa Industrialization Day was created by the UN General Assembly in 1989 and has been held on the 20th of November every year since, in order to raise awareness about the importance of Africa's industrialization. My name is Nick Wilkinson. I'm a policy economist at IGC and currently one of the main thematic leads on industrialization and trade. When we think about economic development, both industrialization and international trade are seen as some of the most important drivers of growth. Understanding these topics are critical to informing policy and ensuring that growth is inclusive. To discuss these issues further, I'm joined by a very special guest. Bogolo Kenewendo is the former Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry in Botswana and Managing Director of Kenewendo Advisory. She's a non-resident fellow at the Center for Global Development and a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader of 2019. Bogolo Kenewendo, it's a pleasure to speak with you. Welcome, and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you very much for having me, Nick. It's a pleasure to be joining you today.
Thank you. So the unprecedented global shock triggered by the coronavirus crisis is deeply affecting African economies. For African countries, their reliance on the global economy, such as through tourism and exporting natural resources, may have a larger impact than the virus itself. Many firms are reporting a reduction in demand, foreign investment has declined, and government revenues are falling. Thinking about these channels specifically, can you reflect on the impact of COVID-19 and how African governments and businesses have responded to mitigate its impact?
Well, as you've already said, the impact of COVID-19 in Africa has been quite drastic and economically speaking. And it's mainly because, our economies are focused on exporting minerals and exporting the main service being tourism. And when in response to COVID, economies shut down, then those two main products were affected, and a lot of African economies really reached a standstill. Like there was no export of those products, no tourists coming in, either regionally or internationally. And we find that those countries that are reliant on those two primary services have had shocks of growth rates of negative double-digit figures. So in Botswana, we're anticipating about a negative 9.5% or so, and I think it's the third highest in the continent, and we expect more to unravel as things stabilize. Because what we've seen as a response in a lot of African governments is rushing. So yes, economies were closed, but immediately afterwards there was a lot of stimulus packages that were being drafted and implemented across the continent, and they helped immediately after or following the lockdowns. But we anticipate that there will be a greater impact on businesses going forward, because some of those businesses actually didn't need a stimulus immediately after a lockdown. There was a little bit liquid, and the constraints to the liquidity and the impact of having no customers will be seen now going forward.
Thank you. I think, yeah, exactly. You raised the case of Botswana, which is a great example of an economy which is reliant on natural resources and tourism. And as you say, they are set to contract by perhaps around 9% this year.
Yes.
Do you think the Botswanan government, or what should the Botswanan government be thinking about specifically when they're thinking about a robust and diversified recovery?
Oh, now it's really a challenge to think of rebuilding the economy instead of just trying to fix what is already there. Is think about new channels of diversification, and we've seen with the breakdown in the global supply chains that it is important that countries also create a base of their own, and so increase their local productive capacities, but also strengthen their relationship in the region, which is why it's so important, the work of intra-regional trade to be done and concluded, of the AfCFTA to be done and concluded, so that we solidify a little bit of a base within the continent should there be extreme external global shocks. So for countries like Botswana that have been reliant and dependent in minerals, this should be a wake-up call to really fast-track increase in local productive capacity in agriculture, fast-tracking in manufacturing, and the products that have come up as key, those that are necessities, because again, a problem with having an economy based on a luxury product is it's the first one to go. And so the impact on that economy becomes almost instantaneous.
Exactly. So, yeah, continental integration and intra-African trade, I think, are key drivers for this economic diversification, industrialization, and inclusive growth. And we know that intra-African trade at the moment is low. I think one report from Brookings suggested it accounted for just 17% of business activity on the continent compared to 59% in Asia. The African Continental Free Trade Area, which was signed in 2018 and due to come into force this year, seemed to be a watershed moment for the continent to advance these objectives. The agreement aims to stimulate trade by removing 90% of the tariffs on goods, facilitate the movement of people and capital, and take steps towards creating an African-wide customs union. Unfortunately, of course, the pandemic has delayed the implementation of the agreement until 2021. Whilst we must be mindful of the varying impacts that such an agreement may have within different economies, how important do you think the agreement is in stimulating African integration? And perhaps now, more importantly, as a platform and driver for an African-wide COVID-19 recovery?
Right. So as I see it, for stimulating growth in the continent, it's in twofold. So one is already in the goods space, and we're all talking about the movement of goods in the continent, and goods and services. And that's and well, and you know, some processes have already been put in place, especially building off of what is already happening at the smaller REX spaces. But while we're still in the goods space, what's important is that we look at the intra-industry development as well, because that is what is pushing intra-regional trade in Asia, in Europe, and so forth. If there is an industry that we're protecting, for example, in South Africa, we're protecting the automotive industry, and anything else that's made out of the continent, out of South Africa, is just very high tariffs. So if we're protecting an industry in South Africa, then some components of it, intra-industry of that product, should be spread across the region, so that everyone in the region can benefit from that protection of that particular product, as an example, right? And so an intra-industry plan and value chain plan is very important to ensure that there is distributive effect of having an agreement of such a magnitude. And then secondly, so that's the goods and services that we've been talking about. But secondly, what I think is very important is once we get to the protocol on investment, then we are able to really strengthen the capacity of African countries in attracting investment and in reducing this stigma that exists that, you know, we have poor governance, we do not protect investments and so forth. But when these tools are in place at a continental level, and we're all expected to adhere to a certain standard in order to attract investment, I think that will begin in itself to start in stimulating not only foreign direct investment, but also domestic investment, and hopefully bring back some of that some of those finances and capital by Africans that is being domiciled at the moment in safe financial safe havens around the world. Because what we know, as a matter of fact, is that African capital is now being used around the world for development. And when that protocol of investment is in place and we're all working towards a good level of standard of protecting investment, then we could be able to re-attract that capital and put it towards the development of the continent.
Thank you. Yes, so I think you've touched on it a bit there. And when we look to the implementation of the agreement next year, are there ever any other key measures and strategies that are needed to ensure Botswana and the Southern African development community in particular maximize its benefits? Of course, I think having a more regional approach, perhaps through the development community, is the key there.
First of all, for a country to realize the benefits of the AfCFTA, they need to ensure that on their own, the doing business reforms are done, that it's easy to do business in that country, it's easy to export, it's easy to import for the purposes to import inputs and to just ensure that a country is competitive. Because once again, if you're not competitive, then you're not going to see the benefits. You're going to be more of a receiver than a main contributor to the AfCFTA. But like I said a little earlier on, for the REX, I really think it's important that an industrial development plan, a regional industrial development plan is very important to ensure that what we have already agreed at continental level as our contribution in the region is distributive amongst ourselves, and we can be able to trade with the rest of the continent and the rest of the world. Because at this point, it's not just us looking at the continent or countries in the continent, but it's also you leveraging off of this collective power to negotiate with the rest of the world.
Exactly, yeah, sort of building up that regional capabilities to then compete in global markets. So,
absolutely.
Beyond COVID-19, what is the role of digital trade in promoting growth and industrialization in Africa?
So for digitalization in itself, I think digitalization in itself has to be a priority for, because COVID has shown us that first we can do it, because when we were called to do it, to adhere to the COVID protocols, countries moved quite quickly to providing services in through digitalization. So digitalization will be important in delivering a more efficient AfCFTA and delivering more efficient cross-border trade. Because at the moment you have places, maybe I take an example of the Kazungula, the Botswana-Kasane borders or Botswana-Zimbabwe borders, where you could have trucks waiting for a week, 2 weeks, or even longer, because the trade facilitation and efficiency of cross-border trade hasn't been that good. But through the use of digitalization, we could see some sort of efficiency. And this is not the first time really this is coming up. It's been part of the trade facilitation agreement, right? Part of what we've been talking about from back then. And it's just now there's a renewed impetus to digitalize because we've seen that the world has to change.
Right, yeah, as you say, I think the digitization, it raises lots of opportunities, lots of challenges, but hopefully it will skew more towards the opportunities and create these efficiencies across borders and for manufacturers. In your opinion, what is the new normal that emerges?
We can talk about problems for anything, I think.
Yeah,
No,
of
I was
course.
saying just quickly that we can talk about challenges for everything really, and we can also start to focus on that. We can't talk about digitalization now while we're still in need of basic resources and basic infrastructure. But I think in this here and now century and in this COVID times, we're seeing that even ICT infrastructure is part of core infrastructure. And as we restructure and rethink what our budgeting looks like, what our plans look like, national development plans, they should certainly include digital infrastructure and ensure that they are also looking at reducing that digital divide that exists. So when we talk about digitalization, it's not only about an online capacity, but it also includes an offline capacity to ensure that those that do not have Wi-Fi or data in the areas but want to trade able to just do some sort of an offline USSD application.
Thank you. Okay, so in your opinion, what is the new normal that emerges from this crisis, and how can African countries build back better?
Well, now the new normal is us spending less for engagement, and I think this is more productive, efficient way of engaging. There are a few times where more in-person engagements will be needed. However, I think we will see a little bit of a restructuring of budgets and the way that we're using government resources and private sector resources, but also a new normal includes just rethinking and acting on urgency, because one, we can no longer hide behind, oh, we have to wait 10 years for that, or we didn't budget for it, because we saw it is possible. When a crisis hit, we saw countries reacting to the need of refurbishing schools to adhere to COVID protocols, refurbishing clinics, hospitals, providing some citywide internet. We are seeing all these changes, and I'm hoping that this sense of urgency that was brought by COVID will be our new normal, that there will be a need to address the main challenges that are being seen out by the constituents, and particularly to deliver infrastructure that is productive and will lead to a ripple effect in the growth of the economy. But that also includes digitalization, but I didn't want to hop on that too much.
That's great. Thank you, Bogolo. I think that's a brilliant note to end on, highlighting the importance of acting on that urgency, maintaining this momentum that perhaps we've seen in a crisis response, and ensuring that the response is proactive and developed at a regional level in collaboration with neighbors and partners.
Yeah. But if I may, before we close, I think many a times when we talk about industrialization, we're also just thinking very high level. And what I usually challenge, and what I challenged my team when I was a minister here, is we should also think about an indigenous economy, think about indigenous knowledge, indigenous products, and see how they can be modernized in order to bring people that feel like they are not a part of this modernized economy. How do we bring them into the mainstream economy in an environment that they feel comfortable with the knowledge that they feel comfortable with, and we can modernize it and export it. You know, I give an example quite frequently of sake, for example, as a drink, that is a traditional Japanese drink, but it is now being exported around the world. It's an indigenous knowledge that has become exportable, and an indigenous product that has become exportable. And I think many a times African countries miss out on an opportunity of modernizing indigenous knowledge, indigenous products, and really building an industry around them, and bringing in more people into the mainstream economy, and reducing poverty, reducing inequalities, and so forth. Because if we do not focus on building back better post-COVID and building resilient economies, bringing people into mainstream economy, then we are just going to once again find ourselves with millions of people sliding into poverty when there's another crisis. So I'll just end there.
Great, no, thank you for raising that. That's a really interesting point. And so thank you, Bogolo Kenewendo, for joining us. It's been really interesting.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.